Okay, we're live here with Brian DeMarco. I want to see who we have on here.
Hey, Chad, how you doing, man? We
Doing good.
People on here. There we go.
Looks like right now it's just me and you. I'm just kidding.
That's
We
how
got a bunch of guys coming in here now.
There we go.
Joe's here. Taylor's here. Chance is here. What's up, guys? We want this to be an interactive type deal. We're going to do some Q&A, so feel free to ask questions using the chat tool there. Just spend some time getting the hang of it. We have Aaron in the back, kind of behind the scenes, also administering some of this too. So if you have any questions, just feel free to put it in that Q&A box, and someone will get an answer to you. But I'm here with Brian DeMarco, former NFL great offensive lineman, second-round draft pick, and now a great within the entrepreneurial space, kind of a mentor for
former
me
great.
Well. Former great, still great.
Old school. Right. Well, Chad, thanks for having me on here today. This is pretty exciting. I'm excited to kick off Forrest's webinars, their series that we're doing here with y'all. I'm excited about this opportunity to share my story. And you know, I think the maybe one of the best parts about my story is I've experienced so many things. I had so many things happen to me that everybody's going to have a chance to relate in some aspect or another. So with that, why don't we just kind of get down to it? And guys, as I get started here, I'm just going to share a little bit about me, my story, my time in the NFL, after the NFL, and then of course in business. So as Chad said, I was the 40th pick in '95 to the inaugural Jaguars. I started there, played there for 4 years. In the early days of Jacksonville, of course, they're having a good run now, but in the early days of Jacksonville, we had some great teams as well. In that '96 season, we were a game away from the Super Bowl, which was pretty exciting. So 4 years in Jacksonville. Then I went on to sign a UFA with the Cincinnati Bengals, and I have to say that when I spoke to my agent about being unrestricted, I told him anywhere but Cincinnati. Cincinnati literally came in the 11th hour and outbid everybody. And who knows? It's the Bengals. Who knows?
Get into it.
But I knew as a player, I knew my clock was ticking. I was already injured. I had, hairline fractures in my spine. I was a mess already. So I knew it would be a miracle just getting onto another team and trying to knock out a few more years. So I ended up going to Cincinnati, playing 2.5 more years there. I was very broken going into my last hit. But my last hit that pushed it over the edge was I did a bit of a reverse toe touch. I got hit from behind and I got hit head to head. So if you can imagine, I was literally broken in half. I ended up with 17 spinal fractures and an avulsion fracture of my hip. Now, an avulsion fracture is where the muscle rips the bone in half. So I was a mess. That was in 2000. By 2007, during that time, of course, there was, you're 2 years to the date on your NFL insurance. So 2 years to the date of my injury, I was cut off all insurance. By 2007, my wife and I, with our 2 young kids at the time, were totally destitute. We had spent every dollar we made on surgeries, rehab, trying to live. It was bad. Matter of fact, so bad that a couple months after my son was born, Enzo, in 2005, that February, I was out in West Texas with my wife. And if you could just imagine this for a second. My wife props me up on the side of a building because I had lost 90% of the function of my right leg, severe nerve damage. She props me up on the side of a building in West Texas, and I'm watching my young, beautiful bride push a mattress to the back of a storage unit. That was home for the next 4 months with 2 young kids, with a newborn and a 3-year-old little girl.
Wow.
So this was actually a big turning point for fast forward to the docs and all that good stuff. Tell you how amazing my wife is and how integral she was to this whole process that I've been through.
I was going to say, because I got 2 kids under 3. I cannot imagine doing that alone. Your wife is a warrior, man.
Yeah. So, a lot of these guys, I'm sure you're married, you have your significant other. Imagine what you say to your wife the first night you're spending a night in a storage unit. I mean, I wish I would have said something else, like I love you and I'm sorry, right, that I got you in this situation, but I didn't. I actually looked at her, and I need to imagine this. It's West Texas in February, so it's cold.
Yeah.
We're piled under about 30 blankets, and we have our kids in between us, and we're trying to keep them warm, right? Mm-hmm. So I look at my wife, and I say, what is wrong with you? Are you crazy? I mean, I am broke and broken. You need to go live with your parents. You'll have a life. The kids will have a life. She literally looked at me dead in my eyes and said, I made a promise to you and a promise to God, and everything will be okay. Now, I don't know about y'all. I still get a lump in my throat every time I say it.
That's faithful, man. That's awesome.
She had this amazing faith and this amazing strength.
We're 5 minutes in and we got the guy crying. All right. That's what we do here.
So, I've been around a lot of big, tough guys. I had never known strength like this before.
Yeah.
So I was truly dumbfounded and just in awe of her strength and her faith that we were going to be okay. So let's fast forward a little bit, another year. Things are really bad. Now, to tell you how badly disabled I was, my hips had rotted through the flesh on both sides. I was wearing full-time wound vacuums just to keep the wounds clean, so I wouldn't lose my legs. So I was a mess and probably tipping the scales about 200 pounds heavier than I'm now, completely sedentary. I got up to, I was a Diet Coke away from 500 pounds, put it to you that way. A biscuit away. So I'm literally dying. I'm dying in every way a man can be dying. Physically, financially, spiritually. I had no self-worth, no purpose, no direction. And I just really wanted it all to end. To be honest with you, I thought I was another second away from being another NFL suicide statistic. So my wife writes a letter to none other than Mike Ditka. Now, Mike, who has been an angel on my shoulder ever since, I didn't know Mike at all, right? But she had heard that he was helping former players. So that's what kind of spurned her to motivate her to write this letter. So within 24 hours, we had people at our door. Within a month, I was in front of the 2 best spinal doctors in the world out in California. So hope flooded back into our lives, right? I was going to get a miracle surgery. It's going to have a miracle drug, go back to work, be a dad, a husband, all that good stuff. So they studied me for a week, ran every test imaginable. And at the end of that week, you can imagine the excitement, right? That we felt like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear what the next move is. The first doctor walks into the room and he looks me dead in my eyes. And he says, if you were a horse, we would have shot you by now. Like I was waiting for the rest of the punchline. Like, what else is there? Right? I mean, there's got to be
program.
Yeah. It was essentially, more of the same, a lot of drugs, more titanium rods and screws. And there's no real answers. And the second doctor walks in and he pulls my wife to the side and says, you need to prepare yourself mentally to put your husband in full-time nursing home care. He's done. This is it. As good as it gets. So imagine when you have that. We had nothing at the time but each other. And then hope was ripped from our lives. So totally at the lowest point of our lives, we're flying back to Austin, Texas. We're sitting on the front porch of our house, and my wife grabs my hands, and we prayed together the very first time, a very real, very desperate prayer to God for answers. We had nothing else and nowhere else to go. So literally through that prayer, we both, no other way to say this, but we both saw this vision for this thing, this product that was going to help me learn how to walk again. It was really simple. We split up separately, actually, and drew pictures and came back a few minutes later. We were drawing the same thing.
I remember that. That's crazy, man.
Which is nuts, right? The God's hand, definitely. So it was made out. The first one we made was out of some ugly yellow truck tie-down strap and an old freight band, those big rubber bands we used to use as resistance.
Yeah.
And we sewed this thing together with fishing line. And if you can imagine these big straps and, and when I'm walking back then, how I got around back then, if I wasn't in a wheelchair or on a walker, I would have a cane in my hand and I would have my hand on the back of my wife's neck, and I would just drag this dead leg. So we go out with that cane, hand on her neck, dragging me out to a tree where she had tied these straps around and put this band around my back. And I just remember the first day of letting go of her neck and dropping the cane, and I was standing on my own for the first time in years. And that alone was victory enough for me. I'd been beaten up by life really bad. That was victory enough to inspire me to keep going. Needless to say, on this simple product, I was able to start learning how to squat again, strengthening my body in places before I was physically ready, and giving my time for my brain to retrain neuromuscularly. Okay. So fast forward 3.5 years of the hardest, most ridiculous physical therapy you can imagine. I learned how to walk again when they told me I would never walk again unassisted. So when I threw out my walkers and my canes for the last time, looked at my wife, said, we have to go help other people. So as you can see, this gorilla you see before you, not necessarily conducive to walking into a boardroom and asking people for money. So I already had knocks against me, right? I had strikes. I am a former NFL player, right? Which was no problem getting investor meetings, by the way, because everybody wanted to talk about playing against Reggie White, and Greg Lloyd and all those guys. But to hand me a check for $1 million or more, that was a different story.
That's different, yeah.
Especially looking like me. And by the way, the story of this crazy beard that you see is that day that we said the prayer on the front porch that day, I felt God had asked me to grow my beard. And I literally haven't cut it since. As you can see, it's pretty ridiculously long. I didn't understand at the time why I do now. Everybody asks me about my beard, and it's my chance to talk to them about my love for the Lord. So
your testimony. Yeah.
So going back to this, of these, knowing these fundamental flaws going into these investor meetings, we knew that we had to bring the business acumen about 1,000 times greater than anybody else. I mean, we had strikes against us. My wife, who was pre-med at UT, had, we had no experience in product design, no experience with intellectual properties and patents and all this. So we had to really bring it. So we end up raising about $4.5 million to launch Primal all those years ago. It's now being used in the best rehab hospitals or rehab clinics and hospitals around the world. And we saw a successful exit about 1.5 years ago, which is kind of like every entrepreneur's dream, right? to build the company up, have that, and have your exit, which was awesome. About 5 years ago, Primal 7, which is the name of the product, won the 2 top product design awards in the world. We actually beat out Tesla automobiles and Dre Beats headphones to win this global prize. With no product design experience. That's why I say God's hand was on this, because A to Z, the entire concept and design really came to us after that prayer.
So just shattering stereotypes and having a ton of victory without any really formal education or experience beforehand. That's just super powerful. So real quick question that some guys might have based on, their limited exposure to product design and to fundraising and stuff like that. When you say you raised $4.5 million to launch Primal, what did you have to that point? What was your minimum viable product or your MVP at that point?
Well, it's really interesting, and the $4.5 million came in phases. Okay. Our first phase of this was, it started off in little chunks, like a lot of folks do. Like it was a $50,000 investment from
all about the first one, right? And then that helps out a lot.
Yeah, but the first big one, you have to imagine this. What we're doing at the time is, I literally turned my house into a factory. So I'm making these products, me and my wife and my kids. I learned how to sew in my 30s, literally, to learn how to use an industrial sewer. I can sit down and sew with the best of them now. But I had to learn how to sew. I had to learn how to do all these things that I never would have dreamed of, getting ready to play in the NFL. So learning all of these new things. So we were building this product in our house, in our yard, actually turned it into a factory, and going out there and selling these door to door to therapists and chiropractors and trainers.
Hustling.
Yeah, really out there hustling. But what was interesting about going into that first serious round of investment, which is about $2.5 million, was we didn't have anything but a dream and a concept. We didn't have a manufacturable product. We didn't have the typical things that we broke every rule. Like we didn't have, the business plan, how it should have looked. Of course, we had an executive summary, but even our numbers were not how they should look in a normal business setting. We literally did the best that we knew how. So going into this was pretty miraculous of raising that first $2.5 million. I'll tell you a quick story about this. The first phase of that came in a check for just over $1 million. Okay. And when my wife and I were going to the closing meeting to go pick up this check, we literally didn't have enough gas money to put in the truck to get to this meeting. We were running around the house with the kids, like going through couch cushions and stuff. We found $1.48. So we literally found $1.48 to put in gas so we get to this meeting. Man. Yeah. So,
and that hunger came through in your pitch, that passion and that hunger. That's awesome, man.
And I think that's a really important thing. That's a really important thing when with guys, when you're going out there and you're looking for money, that passion has to be there for an investor. He has to feel that in you and your excitement for the product, your excitement for what you're doing. And at the end of the day, and I know a lot of folks have heard this before, an investor really needs to feel like he can hang out with you. Like that you can go out and have a drink with this guy and have a beer. You know what I mean? That not that I drink, but you know what my point is. My point is they have to feel like they really like you. And that's really important part of this. And you see that all too often with guys going into these and girls going into these investor meetings, and they're very cold and, they're really nervous. And it's, that's not conducive to a likable attitude. So you have to be likable in these meetings.
Right? Yeah, and that's for sure. So we focus so much early on in our program, as you know, about really helping guys identify the struggles that they've gone through and maybe why they've gone through that. Because I think there's something magical that happens when we're kind of broken down to our core and we're forced to really reevaluate ourselves, our capabilities, our talents. And then there's this really cool pivot that happens where we get down to our core self and we can really identify what our true passions are. And that's when we get into purpose and having a vision like you're talking about. And Forrest has blossomed based on a vision that we had in conversation amongst, me and my wife as well. And then it was just a cascading build up as we had subsequent conversations and people started believing in it and all that. But it just starts with, there's like this humility. It's a breeding ground for those ideas. And then you just have to have the faith to say yes. And lean in,
Right. Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting with your point there of how you feel about your company, that passion, that purpose. And I think every retired guy or guys that are thinking about retiring, they need to be able to process this. If you're still playing, guys, and you're thinking about, hey, this may be my last year, but definitely for you guys that are already retired, the thing that I have found that really destroys us on the inside and a lot of times paralyzes us with fear is that lack of purpose. We've trained all of our lives to go play this game and be great at this game. And for me growing up, I grew up really poor. So football for me was a ticket out, going off to Michigan State, getting drafted. I mean, I was consumed by football. And there's always this kind of saying when you're playing that, hey, it's what I do. It's not who I am, which is I've said that a million times when I was playing. What a line of crap that is. I mean, it really is, because when you get out, you're so, your purpose for training, for everything that you're doing is all centered around this football. You have this very regimented schedule. You know what to do 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Somebody's telling you where to be, what to do. And then all of a sudden, it's just quiet. It's just quiet. And I have news for you guys, for any of the guys that are still playing. Nothing is forgotten faster than yesterday's athlete. You cannot go into these meetings with this attitude that NFL logo is going to close the deal for you and get you where you need to go in business. And I know from my own experience, like we talked about learning that business acumen, having that in place of really focusing on educating ourselves in this space was critically important. And the fact that you can redirect that purpose, and that's the hardest thing of just finding that passion to lock onto. And I've found that it can actually happen multiple times. I've done it with Primal 7. Then I had to reinvent myself when we bought a publishing company. We were very involved in the sports world and the publishing industry. And now with our company we have now, my partner, Aaron King, Drafter. So we developed this SaaS company that's for publishers and for content creators to help them monetize. But of course, we have Drafter Media, which is a full service agency. So reinventing ourselves again. So multiple times, and that's what guys need to learn, is that even if it's your first company out and you're looking to really take this thing off and just really shoot out of the gates like a rocket, this may not be the thing that really makes you who you are in the business world. It may change again.
Cool. That's a super cool point, because so from my perspective, the whole comment of, it's just what I do, it's not who I am, right?
Right.
I was doing big business consulting a few years ago, and everything looked great on the surface, right? And I always said that kind of thing too. Yeah, just kind of who I am. But it took me leaving. I'm sorry, it's just what I do, it's not who I am. It took me leaving and losing all of it to realize my identity was really wrapped up in that persona, because I jumped right into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I had zero knowledge. Entrepreneurial business is so different than Fortune 500 business. It could not be more different. And so I went through my own kind of reformation too. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I can't even imagine going from domain to domain, football to business. I just went from business to business. Different kind of business. So that's a huge transition for these guys. So let me ask you something. You mentioned passion and purpose a lot. I mean, figuratively speaking, at one point you were looking at this huge mountain of stuff you didn't understand, but you had this financial pressure. You could not lean on an education. You could not lean on a mentor or anything like that. What kept you going? I mean, every day there had to be a voice of doubt and fear and worry and all that kind of stuff. Like what kept you going? What got you to that precipice of that?
Well, it's really a combination of things. So first and foremost, this, for me personally, there's a faith component here. For me, I'll put it to you this way. I told people I was a Christian when I played ball. But it was pretty simple to do when you're making that big check every week. It wasn't hard to be a Christian. I wasn't challenged, and I found that I was kind of fake. I was kind of just riding the fence. For me personally, it took losing absolutely everything for me to be able to understand how God played this major role here. But I think the next part of this, for me, from a business standpoint, was finding the right mentors. And it's not as easy as it may sound, because I went through a series of people that wowed me because they spoke a business language that was new to me. It was a business language that I wanted to be able to speak. Heck, Aaron and I joke about that now even with some of our clients about agency speak, we call it. And some small businesses, medium-sized businesses will get duped into marketing agencies that just talk about these big words and use these phrases like KPIs and all this good stuff, and knowing full well that they don't know what you're talking about most of the time. So learning that lesson of finding mentors, and where Forrest really comes into this, by the way, but finding mentors where there's an accountability. There has to be an accountability. I think all men need that, period. But accountability with your mentor and making sure that you're reaching out to mentors in different spaces. I had a really, really fortunate opportunity early on with our first company, and that was to meet the guy by the name of Tim McClure. If you don't know who Tim is, there's a world-renowned advertising agency called GSD&M. He is the M of GSD&M. As a matter of fact, Tim is the guy that came up with the slogan, "Don't mess with Texas," right? So getting a chance to meet with him was, and for him to become a mentor to me was huge. And also another guy who's become a really close friend and is director of the Retired Players Association that's been newly formed for players is Bob Schmidt, who's one of the co-founders of C-SPAN, really successful guy. But finding men like this is a critical part of your journey. You cannot surpass this. You will not get to success on your own. It just won't happen. Like just looking at all of the things that we've succeeded in business-wise over the years, it's always this really large group of people. And when you add it all together, that help that come to fruition.
You can't boast because it's a sum of so many contributors, right? Even if you look at our parents as mentors in some capacity when we're young, right? We wouldn't have made it to 18 without some support. And same goes for college experience, finding an upperclassman that you trust that kind of has you under their wing and stuff. I mean, well, I think with athletes, we can use the team captain analogy, right? It's a guy who's been around, who knows the system, who's proven themselves to some extent.
Right.
They've had some success. They're kind of in there with the coach. They see the overall, they see the big picture. They see the strategy of what the scheme is as well. And they have I think the biggest thing that you mentioned is accountability. They have the confidence and they care enough to hold guys accountable, not because of their own ego or anything like that, but to challenge the guys to grow. I mean, I'm in groups, through church and even individually on my own mentorship. And I'm like, listen, I don't want to come in here and get strokes. I want to come in here and be corrected. Yeah. And we've talked about this before. There's nothing better than constructive correction. I shouldn't call it criticism, but correction, because we want to know we're doing it right. And we don't want a bunch of yes men around us.
Yeah. And let's be real. I mean, in early years in business, I made one mistake after another. I mean, that's one of the things, too, that cripples guys on their journey. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. But that's the importance of having people around you.
Yeah.
You got to, you have to learn from each thing. Because let me tell you something. I have made some of the biggest mistakes there are to make in business. I mean, I can think of one, for example, where we were essentially in early days of Primal, we had somebody take advantage of us for $250,000. Just a massive, massive mistake that was made because, I didn't do the proper due diligence on the guy. I didn't look all the way through. My only saving grace was I had our investor vet the guy as well. But that's the only thing that saved me from complete tragedy in this whole thing. Because imagine, I mean, that's just a ton of money. And to be taken for that amount of money is, not only embarrassing, but it really hurt the company in a big way. Yeah. So climbing out of these things, learning these lessons and not being afraid to go, just go meet life face to face, taking all these things that we've learned in football. It's funny. I want to mention this real quick that I heard a nasty phrase years ago when I was first getting out of the league that haunted me for a long time. And that was that there are no transferable jobs from the NFL to the business world.
Skills, you mean?
No, I'm sorry. No transferable skills from the NFL to real business.
That's such fallacy, man.
And I have found that to be just remarkably false. Every lesson that I learned in football, for teamwork to striving for a goal and all these things, the effort, the time, all of it has gone into success down the road. But again, I think, and I think that comes back to Forrest. And before we kind of open this up, I want to have some Q&A with the guys. Before we open this up, I want to talk a little bit about Forrest and why I'm here and why I think this is such a unique opportunity for retired players to come together, because first of all, everything that we have as retired players is so fragmented. And so we end up losing touch with a lot of the guys that we played with, and we lose community. I think that is in itself one of the really big blessings of what Forrest can become for retired players, is that community, to find those guys to be able to rely on. And on top of that, of getting plugged in with the right mentors. Like if I had a place to go way back when, where I knew, these guys that are mentors, they're going to be vetted for me. and I'm going to have some of that work done for me, that's priceless, guys. It's absolutely priceless. So anyways,
what we do, protecting the athletes and protecting the athletes' brands is one thing, but protecting them from a swindling, from a character perspective I think is even more important, right?
And I think guys need to recognize that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think when
you're
you're
easy pickings. NFL players with money, because we lack experience, are kind of easy pickings for folks. And that comes from all different angles. So I think being a part of an environment where you can vet people and you can be a part of a community of people that care. And I just think that's incredible.
Yeah, one of the things we're really trying to emphasize, we've talked a lot about this with you, Brian, is picking mentors that are naturally, they don't have any ulterior motives. So they have a sports background of some sort. We want guys and gals who have had at least a college level experience playing sports, because there's just kind of this shared ethos and understanding and thought process amongst athletes, so they can kind of relate to the athletes. But they've gone through our program to some extent. So we really do vet them over time. There's also a non-solicitation agreement, meaning they cannot solicit services from the athletes. That's going to be a great way to sift through a lot of people who are selfishly motivated. And we don't want to prevent anyone from doing business. Obviously, if an athlete's interested, we can make an exception and we can kind of be we can be a partner in that conversation. But we definitely don't want guys coming in under the auspices of mentors and just starting to sell everybody on financial services or car insurance or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah, because it happens in every other avenue that we have available to us. And so that's
something we're just going to we have to stick to our guns on, because, this is we really don't want we don't want any special cases in this ecosystem. We want everyone to be playing by the same rules, because we believe in what we're doing here, and any system that is working, that is beneficial, is worth protecting, and it has a code of ethics and whatnot. And if players don't subscribe to that code, if mentors don't subscribe to that code, and if the startups that are interested in integrating with these guys don't subscribe to that code, then it's just not a fit. And we're willing to forego the short-term financial gains and the short-term media and all the sexy stuff to preserve what we really believe in, which is this forest ecosystem.
Awesome. I love it. You know what? You ready to open things up? I'd love to do some Q&A with these last few minutes with these guys. So guys, if you have any questions, let's ask away. And now's the time.
Yeah, guys, just unmute yourselves. Feel free to jump in and ask a question, or you can just use the Q&A tool, the chat tool there. If not, until we see some stuff come through, I'm just going to keep peppering Brian with some questions.
Ask away.
So when you were raising your seed capital, that $1 million check, like substantial cash, tell me what the investors were asking in terms of how you were going to spend the money and how you answered that. Maybe any learnings from those conversations.
Well, that's any investor is going to want to know where their money's going and how it's being spent. I think that's one of the things that we probably spent the most time on. Going into those final meetings, getting ready to close this deal, of letting them have a really firm understanding of what was what, and of course getting their approval, because when we look for investors, we didn't want just any investor, although at the time, it was hard to be picky or selective. So I'll just say that we were really blessed early on. But I think it was having an investor that I knew could open doors as well as work with us. So anyways, in that seed round, coming back to that, of making sure that everything was structured properly operationally, and we knew exactly what was going to be spent on personnel, operating expenses, what was going to be spent on, all the cogs that you have for building a product. That had to be very, very clearly lined out. And actually one of the early mistakes I made with that first round of a big investment like that was undervaluing myself, because that's the time where you're being asked to put in, hey, what are you going to make on this deal? and we all know that, hey, most investors want to see you really kind of skimping by. They want you eating peanut butter and jelly, and hey, until they get theirs, you're not getting yours. But I think it's really important for any founder to really assess what he's worth in that deal. And I really undervalued myself and overvalued everybody else.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it might be a good thing and very unselfish, but we ended up making some mistakes there with people just, again, because I thought, oh, they're more experienced than me, that they talk the talk better than I do, that they're worth more. And that's just not the case. So just something to think about if you ever find yourself going into that investment round, of making sure that you're getting what you're truly worth inside the company, because nobody's going to love the company like you do, period.
Yeah, especially if it was your vision. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So tell us what it's like to kind of go to these trade shows and to market your product. Maybe some tips when you're marketing a product like that, ways to stand out, maybe any selling tips when people are walking by. What was a way to grab them in that moment?
And that's a big thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because we need to talk about what every guy really wants to talk about, and that's revenue. How do we make money? How do we make an impact, make money now, to turn things around? And I'll tell you, one of the things that I wish I knew early on was understanding that when we had an event like a big convention, let's say, and I'll tell you from experience of going out to one of the world's largest fitness conventions, which is called the URSA convention, which was out in LA at the Staples Center, 250,000 people going through this thing. And we had our place there with Primal. We were not prepared for that. We didn't have any way to collect data. We didn't have any kind of real sales funnel going on. We didn't support what we were doing socially. So it's really important when you go into any event to, number one, avoid that shiny penny syndrome, which we find a lot of young entrepreneurs go like, hey, I'm going to try this. Hey, I'm going to try this. And you're just striking out left and right, instead of going back and saying, okay, let's focus on this one thing and let's do this right across the board. Looks like we got a question here from Chance. You want to read that to me? I don't have my glasses on.
Yeah, what would you tell someone wanting to be a founder? The team you need in place, how to grow and scale?
So it's kind of a tricky question, because like most businesses, it starts off with just you and a friend, a partner, right? Or like me, it was me and my wife. So I think getting what you need to have in place is really, and I know this is going to sound oversimplified, but once you have that product or service, pay attention to the customer service aspect of it. So when we would, for example, or when we were making the product in our backyard in those early days, and I would sell this product to a doctor or a chiropractor or something like that, right? We would be at their beck and call. Now, it was really hard. We were on call 24/7 to these folks to answer questions, to help them with training, all of that stuff on the product. But that alone in the early days, making sure that your customer service is on point, and that you actually have a plan of this is how we answer this customer service portion of us, and making sure that you have the systems and protocols in place. Now, when you're first starting out, you don't have any of these things, right? And a lot of you don't know what you don't know. So when you have things happen to you in the early parts of your business, that's an opportunity to build that protocol, that system, right? So you're not doing it over and over and over again, right? So every time you have that opportunity, whether it's customer service or, how you're handling a refund or whatever that is, make sure that you're documenting that stuff and you're filing that stuff away. This is how it gets handled.
Yeah, that's good. So for a digital business, let's say it's not so product oriented. I know there's a little bit of a different formula here, and I want to answer that question as well. So for a digital business, what's the best, way to break into the market? I think Chance might be interested in this too. What's a great way to break into the market? Is it finding that first flagship client and really creating like a custom solution around their problem? Is it doing some market research and then going out there with a solution and just pitching it to people, but being flexible in how you implement it? Give us some advice on how you'd go to market with like a digital solution, like a media company or a marketing firm.
Well, and I've done this a couple of times, with our media company, as well as with Drafter, which Drafter, the SaaS part of Drafter, which is built for content creators, right, to monetize their content. Going through a couple different options and looking at this, when we first started this a year and a half or so ago, how are we going to unveil this? So one of our plans is next year, for example, we'll be unveiling it at South by Southwest in March and sponsoring that sports and technology convergence. So having big opportunities like that. But again, just like I talked about with the convention, making sure that there's a plan in place to take advantage of that moment. Otherwise, it just, what does it matter? And another really great example of this was we were part of a convention called Modern Day Marine years ago. And what a big opportunity to be in front of every general and admiral in the world, all the allied forces, right? And we thought, oh my gosh, we're going to get this Department of Defense contract and it's going to be really simple. Well, again, we went to this thing unprepared. And what was the follow through going to look like here? So going back to the SaaS company, I think it really goes along the same lines as making sure that you have that follow through with any big event. But there's also a different opportunity here. And I'm going to tell you a story of a company called Grainger. And if you haven't heard of Grainger, Grainger sells industrial supplies, from big, monstrous tools that you'd find like in a steel stamping factory, all the way down to screws and nuts and bolts and all that stuff. Grainger had a very interesting model. And they're all a tech company. Most of the stuff they do is online. But what they did in their early days is they ended up going out to a big company, a big industrial company up north, and telling them, hey, we're going to build a custom solution for your company. It's going to cost you X. But at the end of the day, you're going to have all of the products that you need for your business right here in this beautiful formatted digital experience. And they went on and built this thing. And that was literally Grainger's first $500,000 investment. And today Grainger's this, maybe even $1 billion company. So there's several different ways to approach this for sure.
Yeah. So I think a big thing in all the things you mentioned, so accurate. I mean, it's one of those things. I think a lot of ex-athletes are going to be, they're naturally going to be talented in networking because they have the personality, they look good, they're fit, they're built and all that. And they're just comfortable interacting with a lot of people. They know how to play around and all that. People like them. That's why ex-athletes really excel in sales roles, right?
Right. That's for sure.
There has to be a plan behind that. There has to be an execution plan, which even I've had to really learn that in entrepreneurship. Even if I sell this group, they're going to ask for some stuff. And if I don't have anything built, what's the point? I look like a fool, like a really good looking fool. So
exactly.
What's the point, right? And then another thing that I kind of pulled away is just market research. So, and I'm not a big researcher guy who's going to go around and poke around on websites. I get out and talk to people, but I think you've really mentioned it is know your customer, know the problems in the market, know the gaps in the market, and then fill a gap. I mean, we tell guys this all the time. They're like, I don't even know what I would want to do if I turned into an entrepreneur or whatever. Why don't you just identify a problem that you can relate with? Odds are somebody else or like a good subset of people are also dealing with that problem. That is a business opportunity right there. I mean, look at Uber, right? They saw a problem with an already completely scaled system of taxis. They made a little tweak, they incorporated technology, and it's worth billions of dollars now. So those are great pieces of advice. We had another question come through from Chase. How did you go about building a team around you that complemented your strengths and weaknesses?
Oh, wow. I think, we've built teams with several companies now. Number one, I found out early on that was something that I thought was a strength of mine until we really got down to the nitty gritty.
Oh, you mean building a team?
Building a team. And once again, guys, I mean, I think that's maybe the power of having me around here. I've made so many mistakes. I've made all of them and lived through this stuff. I think, again, it's just knowing that you're not going to do this alone. So when you're building a team, make sure that you have people that you can go to also vet people, and I think, remember this. This is really important. Nobody, I don't care what you give them, I don't care how much equity or how much you pay them, will ever love your company like you do. Nobody. I have found that again and again and again, and I've given a lot away. But finding, oh my gosh, like how are they not thinking like I am? And was really dumbfounded by this. Like, I just gave you the world. I'm paying you a lot of money. I gave you equity in the company. How are you not working 24/7 like I am? And that's just the bottom line. They're not going to feel the same way that you do. So keeping that in mind, you have to put your expectation just a notch below and make sure that you're bringing people on. But when you do that there are a set of goals and standards that must be in place at all times. They have to be able to reach these things at all times. You don't want anybody ever coming on and just saying, hey, I'm just here, and I'm letting you to your own devices. I don't care how smart or how talented they are. Leaving people without these very defined objectives is chaos.
That's super powerful, right? I think that's the equivalent of a guy joining a football team, and he's just he's one of those hyper utility guys. He's super fast, but do we put him on kick return? Is he a slot receiver? He needs a role, right?
Yeah.
And then he can get better at that role, and he can excel within that role. I really like that. It's so true, because, a lot of guys consider themselves super dynamics. So they're like, just let me know what you need. But, man, it just simplifies everything when you have a clear role. And it can always grow, can always change, but let's start with something, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're getting more questions coming. I'm just going to keep firing these at you. So MJ McFarland comes at us with, when exploring business opportunities, did you ever feel like you were being taken advantage of due to your lack of business experience? And if so, what are some things to be aware of in those conversations?
I think, well, just like I told my example of being taken for almost $250,000 early on, that was a big lesson learned. Trust and verify, right? And I think that was something that I had to learn the hard way early on, that I would get with these people, like I said, that they knew. It's funny. I mean, it's really, in our environment, anybody that really doesn't understand the business world. But for me personally, I was so wowed by everybody in my early days that was speaking that business talk, because it was like this whole new world to me. And I was just hungry to learn. I wanted to learn and consume from everybody. So I was a little bit more trusting than I should have been. And it was bad. Like, the experience I'm talking to you about was really rough. And this guy, I'll put it to you this way. He even forged a brigadier general's signature. That's how bad this was. And I was taken with all of the stuff he did. It is. It's a federal offense.
Yeah.
And there were charges pressed against this guy. But my point was, he was coming at us with all of this stuff. And he was making it seem like all of these great things were getting it done all over the place. And I just trusted the guy. I said, wow, he's bringing me this signed document from this brigadier general. He's got, communications with the sourcing company and all these things that I thought were something in my early days, but they just weren't. And if I would have just taken the time to listen to him and then just verify all the steps that he was taking, I would have learned, and I would have saved myself the pain and heartache of all the issues that we dealt with that. So trust and verify. I don't care if it's your best friend, just kind of trust and verify.
Yeah.
Because remember, if it's not, if they're not a founder with you and they're not part of this thing, right, they're not going to love it like you do.
Yeah. That's such good advice. We got another one from Joe. What is one skill that you learned on the field, whether in training or otherwise, that you find yourself applying in the business/entrepreneurial world?
Boy, there's actually a lot to that. But I think one of the things that's helped me all along my journey is, and I think this is kind of inherent with all guys that have made it to that level of playing a professional sport in the NFL, because we all know how impossible it is to get there. Now, even if you were just there for a day and you had a cup of coffee, right, Aaron? or you were there for years, the things that you had to do to sacrifice the work ethic just to get there for that amount of time is something pretty special. And so no matter how much I didn't know about certain things, I always knew this one thing that I carried over from football. I will outwork you every day of the week. And I knew that even from playing ball. Like I knew, yes, I started and I played all those years, did all this cool stuff, but I wasn't the best athlete on our team. And I definitely wasn't the best offensive lineman on our team. But I knew that whatever I lacked, maybe in physical talent or whatever it was, athletic ability, I was going to flat out outwork you. And I took that into the business world. And that's what's really helped. Now, I'm going to say this with a caveat, especially for you guys that have families. There is balance here too. It's really important especially for new people in business, to find balance early on, or else you're going to go insane because you're going to be nothing but working 24 hours a day. So finding a healthy balance. Yeah. But definitely work ethic. Yeah. Work ethic by far.
A lot of the guys, we sense some of that with some of the athletes, and like I suffer from this too, is just burnout. So you just grind and grind and grind, but it's not sustainable, and especially when you're passionate about something, sometimes it feels like you're taking a break from it to be with family, when it should not be like that at all.
Well, here's the truth. Here's the truth about that. And actually, who helped me with this was my wife, Autumn. And she's actually said to me, if you are afraid, because we talk this big talk, oh, business is great. And whenever we're out, right, and we're talking to people about our what we're doing, and we talk about how great things are and it's worth X amount of money and we're doing great. And she came back to me and said, if you are afraid to walk away for a day and shut down for a day, what do you really have? You don't have all of these things that you really say. If you think the house is going to burn down because you want to take a break for a moment, none of it's actually worth anything. So it helped me reevaluate. Okay, what do we really have? And had to build in some of that trust factor with the team that we're surrounded with as well.
Yeah, that's huge for trust, and the power of I guess the skill of delegating turns into a really pivotal one too, because there's just too much going on. You have to be
especially in the early days. Yeah. I always, kind of laugh off when people talk about delegating, because, in the early days of a startup, when you're the CEO, you're also taking out the trash, right? Cleaning the bathrooms. You're doing all of that.
I should call it divide and conquer. I shouldn't call it delegate.
Which actually brings me to a point with one of these things, and I just want to talk about LinkedIn for a second with former players. And this is just a pet peeve. It was a very, very long time on LinkedIn before I called myself the CEO of anything. And because one of the things that I noticed with former players is that everybody was a CEO, and everybody flaunted that NFL thing, thinking that it's going to make me in business and I'm a CEO and I'm still important. I think a lot of ways we need to get over ourselves. Matter of fact, it was probably about a year before I even put my NFL experience on my LinkedIn in early days, because I wanted to, I didn't want people interested in me just because I played. But I also wasn't going to put CEO up there when I knew in the early days, what are you the CEO of? Put yourself as the co-founder or director or something like that. But CEO to me, that means something totally different. And I think that a lot of young guys don't truly understand what it means to be a chief executive officer of a company. And I still think that way today with a lot of that even trying to live up to some of my friends. Like I have a good friend, Chris Redding, who's the CEO of US Physical Therapy, which is this, $1 billion company traded on New York Stock Exchange. And I'm going, well, that's a CEO. Right. So it's just another way, I think, for players to put yourself in check. of just making sure that you're being, just correct with yourself and being honest with yourself with things.
And that goes hand in hand with, I mean, I should say that goes for all people, not just players. I think people get a little bit too obsessed with titles.
Yeah. You just formed an LLC and you're now the CEO, right? Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
You don't even have a product yet, but you technically
that generates revenue apparently.
Yeah, right.
So. It's true. So, we're gonna go lightning round. We have a few minutes left. I don't see any more questions, so we're gonna go lightning round here.
All right. Shoot.
Just have a little fun. Favorite book other than the Bible?
Oh man. It'll probably tell a little bit about me. I like Machiavelli. And I'm a big fan actually of John Steinbeck, who I've been reading since I was a kid. So of Mice and Men and Red Pony and all of those. Yeah.
Mice and Men was trippy, by the way that ended. That was crazy. Favorite movie?
Oh, come on, man. I'm Italian. Rocky, of course.
Oh, my God.
Come on, DeMarco, man.
Remember the Titans kind of guy.
Rocky 3, actually.
Rocky 3, okay. So not Creed?
No, not Creed. Old school Rocky. Before he got too old.
Now he's a trainer. Okay, so one thing you would change about the NFL and one thing you would never change about the NFL.
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. I think if I had the opportunity to change something, I would definitely make more real, profound ways for guys to transition. I think that's a big part, and I think put more behind it. There's a lot of psychology that goes behind what it takes to become an NFL player. And I think that in a way, we are, in our early days, we're recognized as special in some way. And then that ends. And I don't think any person is ready for that when that happens. Not truly. It's a bit of a shock to the system and the void. It's the quiet. It's the quiet that gets to us all. So I think, helping with the transition a little bit more, making it more in-depth and more inclusive, not letting guys disappear and slip through the cracks. I think that's one of the things I'd like to see change. I'd like to be a part of that change. As far as what I wouldn't change, with all the talks now around concussions and things like that, it's such a huge issue for all of us, and we're all dealing with these things. And, especially during my day of playing where, it was just, you got your bell rung, that was a concussion. So, even considering all of these things, the game is wonderfully, beautifully brutal. And it's that way for a reason, and because people enjoy it. I enjoyed playing that. It's actually what I miss about the game probably the most is the physicalness of it. But I wouldn't change that. Now we can have better technology, right? That can help us with the brain injuries and all of that. And we can have better ways of coaching how we play, which I think is important. But I think regardless, men are going to find a way to compete physically and knock each other out.
Yeah, men are going to be bashing their heads somewhere.
I mean, look at what they did with boxing. Boxing was the king of all sports back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and then, football really came into its own, and that became the national pastime. But even so, at the heat of of all of the concussion issues and the CTE, here we are now with MMA, right? And the
super intense
dominance of this, it couldn't be more brutal. Men are going to find a way to knock each other out. And that's not always a bad thing. I think inherently what football teaches young men cannot be replaced with any other sport. It's not basketball. It's not anything else. And I think those lessons learned are there and need to be cherished.
Yeah. Wow. This is awesome. Brian, we just want to thank you so much for taking the time and just giving us an hour of your wisdom today. It was really fun too. And we're just really excited to have you on board as a mentor at multiple levels, I should say. Any parting words or any last comments for these guys?
Guys, I'm wide open, and feel free to contact me at any time and pick my brain. And these guys can give you my email address, and look forward to connecting and answering more questions and having time to meet with y'all and however I can best serve. And that's really the attitude that I take into all of this, is just learning how to serve and pay it forward. So however I can help, I'm there.
It's awesome, man. All right.
All right. Thanks for attending, guys. All right. Talk soon. Bye.